every level of compute, there will be an application that optimizes that compute for a certain niche. In other words, not unlike the animal kingdom, we will have digital worlds that specialize in certain niches driven by the level of compute. This is kind of the gist of a conversation that Ilya Sutskever, and I really apologize for the way I pronounced the name, but I believe it's Ilya Sutskever. He is an AI researcher. He is part of OpenAI. He was also part of the first big AI breakthrough in modern times, which was the ImageNet paper that propelled the whole machine learning revolution. An interesting guy. He was on the Robot Minds podcast with Peter Abel. I want to discuss this podcast and share a few ideas that I gathered from that podcast. This is not even a podcast. It's August 25th, 2021. This is Krim Delco. This is the second installment of today. So we're still up 9.3% for the year. The market's up 19.3%. We're underperforming by 10%. So this is a podcast. I sometimes review conversations, books, all these kinds of things. And this is a conversation between Peter Abel and Ilya Sutskever. I think Peter Abel's podcast, in my book, is now the most important podcast, at least for us at Orange Capital Partners. The purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And I keep reiterating that a lot of what we do is reading, of course, having conversations with people. We're knowledge workers, but we don't sit in front of a computer and type. We don't do that kind of work. What we do on a daily basis is, first and foremost, we try to use creative ideas to find opportunities for wealth generation. When I say creative, I mean creative in a sort of very practical sense, something that hasn't been done before by humans. So creativity has often this sort of, oh, well, you need to be this crazy artist in New York or Paris or something. That's not what we mean. What we mean is simply we want to do something that hasn't been done before. We want to do it in a way that hasn't been done before. We want to know something that other people don't know, of course, in a legal way. So these are the kinds of things we're trying to achieve at Orange Capital Partners. Now, how do we get there? We read a lot, because reading is the conditioning of the mind, the same way a mixed martial artist does conditioning in the gym. She doesn't necessarily do karate or boxing or jiu-jitsu. She does general, core training, back work, maybe yoga. And that's the kind of thing that we consider reading is doing for our minds. And I think these kinds of podcasts, like Peter Abel's podcast, I would say, to use the MMA analogy, it would be probably along the lines of doing reps, let's say doing arm bars in jiu-jitsu. So doing those types of reps when you rep a certain technique. So you're not in a sparring, you're not in a tournament, you're not in a street fight, you're not using your technique to defend yourself or win, but you're using the technique. So it's a little bit further away from just conditioning. It is still conditioning. It is still helping you generate power and all that stuff. So that's kind of the way we see podcasts. And this particular podcast is very useful because Peter Abel is, first and foremost, a very interesting human being. He is very articulate and he has access to interesting people. And that trifecta makes a good podcast, in my view. So now let's get back to the podcast. He interviews Ilya Sutskever. And I think what's really important here is to understand that I think when we talk about here's the argument. We believe in Orange Capital Partners that the future of wealth generation can simply answer with the question, okay, who can use the most effective compute to solve what problem? Compute and problem. Which problem am I solving and how am I using compute to do it? If I'm not solving a problem, you're not interesting to me. If you're not solving a problem, I don't want to invest. And if you're not using compute to solve the problem, I don't think you will succeed. That's, in a nutshell, the way we see the investment landscape. So it doesn't mean that other investments are not interesting. you can buy commodities and all that stuff. I'm not saying this is the only way to do it. However, I would say that wealth generation in the next 20 to 30 years, which is sort of the time frame that we care about. I'm 53 years old, so I would say maybe 50 years, give or take. In that time frame, I think that what compute can I apply to what problem? That is the question and answer space that I'm interested in. And our portfolio right now is Tesla and the CRISPR index. So we have applied our capital to the solution of decarbonizing energy, of taking the human out of transportation, so making transportation autonomous. Decarbonizing energy, by the way, involves a lot of compute, and I'm going to go into details why there's compute involved here. And then the CRISPR index is a collection of companies that are applying directly CRISPR technology to solve medical and pharmaceutical and other life science problems. And then there's companies such as Twist Bioscience or PacBio that are, I would say, adjacent, sort of in the synthetic biology space, in the genetics, in the genome reading space, because let's say PacBio is helping us to read the genome, which is necessary to digitize the genome, which is necessary to apply compute to the genome. So there's a value chain that we like to use. We call it the CRISPR index because the idea was inspired by CRISPR. And what CRISPR really does, to paraphrase one of the researchers, the name eludes me now, that I heard recently talk about it, is CRISPR allows us to start writing the language. So when the genetic revolution started in the 50s of the last century with the DNA discovery, we started to learn how to read the genome and how to read biology, and now we're starting to write and talk the language of biology, and this is what CRISPR does. So it is very powerful, and once we know how to read and write, then we can start applying compute to start solving problems. So to come back to Ilya's quote, so we have different types of compute that will find different types of niches. I think this will apply to many, many parts of the world, of the business world, of society. I think we're looking at a future with enormous step changes in productivity. So here we are in line with Cathie Wood. We believe that productivity will increase so dramatically that at least for a while will have dramatic deflationary effects. What that really means is that you can do, let's say, you can solve problems with a lot less labor, and therefore you can solve it much faster and much more at scale, and therefore give people, at least for the short term, the same products and services that we demand now for much, much less. Now, over time, that will change because people will adjust their expectations. And I don't think that we will have a deflation forever, because with this new sort of, call it the next industrial revolution, which is AI, also new needs will come up and so on and so forth. And I think we will always have jobs and all that stuff. But for the next 10 to 20 years, we have a step change in productivity, which I think will happen. We will then also have a deflationary effect in a lot of products and services. For example, healthcare can be massively deflationary if CRISPR and the whole digitization of life science actually works. And if we can take the human out of transportation and decarbonize energy, we can have a massive, massive decrease in the cost of energy and transportation, which are very big parts of our cost function. Education can be also much more efficient, and so on. So a lot of the parts of society today that are expensive and driving up costs and inflation can be reduced, and therefore we will have a deflationary effect. But I want to talk in this podcast a little bit more about this concept of computation and how we tie computation to investment. And here's how we think about it. So again, we look at the world of business. Let's say traditionally, business schools would teach people things like, okay, what's the 3 Ps? Product, price, promotion, or 4 Ps, whatever. So all these kinds of things. In general, what people do when they look at businesses, or traditional investors, they look at businesses as companies that provide products and services. They look at businesses in terms of, let's say, markets. They look at businesses also, a lot of investors look at, let's say, who runs the business, what kind of talent is in the business, and all that kind of stuff. And that's all good and nice. Now, the way we look at the world is very different, or we're starting to look. This is a new thought that we're still articulating. So excuse me, maybe if I'm a bit vague here, but the point is that we want to start looking at the world as a, what problem are you solving and how are you using computation, or how can you use computation? Can computation be used in terms of solving that problem? And in addition to that, I want to use another quote by Ilya, and that is that you want to go where the most learning happens. So what we're trying to do at Orange Capital Partners is find a way, find situations, sectors, companies, where you can apply computation in a way that you have learning, so the machine learns, machine learning, in order to find the most optimal way to solve the problem. And the learning process is really, it's nothing other than try and error. But if we can do it in the digital world, we can do it at scale much, much faster. In other words, we can, let's say, find the optimal molecule that solves a medical problem by doing self-supervised reinforcement learning in a way that we can just try and error millions and millions of times per second, and therefore have a solution maybe within a few weeks, when this same process in the bespoke method that we use prior to today, so meaning in the past when we had this bespoke method of pharmaceutical research, it would have taken us hundreds and thousands of years. So that's the excuse me, that's the line that we're trying to draw between companies that can use computation in a way that learning can happen much faster, or try and error can happen much faster at much lower cost to solve a certain problem. And that's why computation matters. So the answer, actually, what I'm trying to say here is that, why does computation matter? Do we really care about computation per se? No. Computation is simply another way to do fast try and error. And we've said that many times before in the podcast. The definition of disruption for us is lower the cost of iteration. And the next step, now you can lower the cost of iteration in many ways. For example, what the Starship is doing in Boca Chica at SpaceX is a pretty expensive way to iterate. How about we could have an algorithm self-play, finding through reinforcement learning the best structure in a simulated environment, and do it a million times within the next couple of weeks, and then find the best design it, and fly to Mars. This is the vision. I think companies like Tesla are on the path towards becoming pure computation companies that solve problems by applying machine learning techniques, or other AI techniques in particular. What we're excited about, and that was the previous episode of today, which is the self-supervised reinforcement learning. That's kind of like the AlphaGo. I call it the AlphaGo Zero approach. So if you can have AlphaGo Zero approaches in other areas, which I think we will have, this will happen. AlphaGo Zero, in the words of David Silver, who is the head researcher of DeepMind in that field, when they created AlphaGo Zero, said it. He said, the thing about AlphaGo Zero is we took the explicit knowledge out of the system and had the system learn by itself, playing AlphaGo with nothing. That's why it's called zero. And by taking out the knowledge, we generalize the AI, and this is the beauty. So we can then apply this to other problems, and hopefully we can apply it one day to driving. We can apply to finding the best medical solutions for problems in the medicine. We can find it also to build organic photovoltaic cells that have much higher efficiencies and are much cheaper to produce and have much longer durabilities than we have today. Those are the kinds of things that we hope we can solve, and that's why we at Orange Capital Partners, and this is, it's a little bit shy of a new manifesto, but I think we will be in the process of formulating a new manifesto where we will explicitly try to write down this, that we are a computation company. We are looking for situations where iteration can be sped up through computation and where real physical problems can be solved through computation. Thank you.